Looking ahead, what do you think will separate the companies that adapt well from the ones that fall behind?
You can't really move forward with AI unless you have a well-structured ad tech architecture and a well-structured business process. Yeah, computers can make mistakes at the speed of light. If you don't have the fundamentals down to begin with, you're just going to propagate bad processes moving forward.
Welcome to the Incremental Marketer, a content series where we meet with top marketing executives and leaders across industries to help you drive growth in your business. Welcome to the Incremental Marketer. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Hines, Vice President of Business Development at Overline. Jeremy has spent more than 20 years in digital advertising in business development, revenue operations, and strategic partnerships. His career has taken him across agencies, publishers, technology companies, and consulting teams, including Digitas, Yahoo, Univision, Infinitive, Booster, Pure Integration, and now Overline. What makes Jeremy's perspective especially valuable is that he's seen the advertising ecosystem from so many angles: planning, sales, operations, very firsthand, technology, and partnerships. And I think that's important because a lot of the challenges companies face today aren't just about choosing the right media channel or platform. They're about how organizations actually work, how teams align, how systems connect, and how strategy turns into execution. So today, we're going to talk about how digital advertising has evolved, where operational complexity creates friction, and what it takes to build stronger, more sustainable growth strategies. Jeremy, welcome to the Incremental Marketer.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. What a great intro.
We are super excited to have you here. I'm super excited to have you here. I know your background. We were in the early days of the internet when we first worked together, and then you've had just a storied career since. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of your journey to get to where you are today, and then a little bit about Overline as well?
Yeah, so, I was really lucky to have started off at Digitas. I was told that it was the Harvard of marketing when I started there, and I just learned a ton in the time that I was there. And I think the grounding in from an agency perspective, where I saw the marketer side, I was dealing with the publisher side. I did a foray into some of the ad tech side because Digitas was kind of always at the forefront of that. So that was kind of the seed of my career and how it blossomed out into multiple channels. And when I went over to Yahoo, I immediately was interested in kind of the operational side and how things worked. There seemed to be a ton of areas to play in that aspect. And so that kind of kicked me off into RevOps and doing a ton of technology changes at Univision. If I think about it, putting the agency days together with the operational pieces, what that did was lead me directly into the consulting world. And that was just a great time at Infinitive. It was lightning in a bottle. We did work with amazing companies like Hulu, Disney, and others. And it was another area where it was just a ton of learning, being able to experience in a really microcosm how all of these organizations worked, what they were doing, what was important. It was a really good learning experience for me. And that's kind of just paid forward. And then, seeing what's happening on the SaaS side as well was very interesting. And it kind of fleshed out my visibility across kind of what people think within the ecosystem. How, as a buyer at Univision, I would always have these questions about where is this coming from? Where's that coming from? But then being on the booster side, I was able to see, now I understand kind of some of the pressures that they're under, or some of the things that are important to them that may not be visible to a buyer on the publisher side or the agency side, for example.
That makes sense. And your SaaS examples are very, like, Booster is a very specific use case. And can you kind of describe what SaaS tools you've worked on, built, operated, and sold?
It's very wide ranging, and I've been very lucky to be able to work on many types of technology implementations and optimizations, from CRM systems to order management systems to ad servers, sales incentive and compensation, data, measurement as well. So it's really been across, I would say, almost the entire ecosystem. I feel like things are popping up left and right all the time, but the core functions of the ad ecosystem, I've had the opportunity to work across most of those systems.
And they're so context specific, like RevOps workflows. What are you seeing in terms of SaaS and this era of AI? Kind of the SaaS apocalypse, prediction that these tools will all get built in-house by somebody, using Claude Code, and their day is over. What do you think in terms of what you're seeing?
I feel like it's exciting, it's scary, but there are a lot of things to consider. And so one of the things I've been saying about AI is that we are in a similar days of the Wright brothers have just flown the plane 1,000 feet, and it's exciting. Everyone can see the potential, but we're not in the days of a cargo ship or a passenger airline. Not yet, right? We can see that coming, but we're not there. So the question is, how do you get there safely? How do you build that passenger ship without risking injury or death to the people on board that flight? And it's very similar with AI. So sure, I could see really large impact to the SaaS world, but there are a couple things that I think that have to really be thought about, considered, figured out before anyone really takes that journey. And it's not too dissimilar from the question that we always ask of our clients as we enter into the decision to bring on new technology. There's, especially with larger companies, there's a question of, do we build or do we buy?
Right.
I liken that to, it's a weird analogy, but a poem. Like, you can have a well-formed sonnet and everyone understands that format and you're working within that format, or you can have this kind of new freeform. And if everybody's writing new freeform poems, let's say, do they actually crystallize and have that shape that you need? And if you think about that from a SaaS perspective, right now we have, like, let's go with OMS, for example. We're in a world where there's only a handful of OMSs. Some of them have more share than others. And if you've worked in that system, you can go from company to company, and the company doesn't have to worry about training on how to use that system, maybe how to use that system within the approval rules and confines of their company. But the foundation is already there. If everyone's building their own SaaS tools, now it's just free for all, it's free form. But then when you think about that from a training perspective, every time you get a new employee, they're on a brand new system that they've never seen, that may have a completely new paradigm. And so you got to question, like, what's the value of using industry standard software versus building this thing that will have actually impacts after you've built it? The other piece is that, maintaining it, it's really fun to stand something up, but then you need somebody. Even with AI, you need somebody to manage the backlog, make sure that stuff continues to roll out, make sure that you're up within the industry. So there's I think there's a lot of challenges around building your own platform beyond just the idea of, well, now we don't need developers, we don't need as many developers.
I think that's a great point. And you have the OMS order management system example at Hulu for just the audience to understand the magnitude of the specificity and the users on these platforms. So what do they do? This is a RevOps, AdOps role, and how many people are working on this, and the kind of the specialization that's needed there is just for example.
Yeah, so the order management system specifically, I kind of just call it the cash register of buying and selling media. So it allows you to create a proposal, work through the negotiations of the proposal, working with a confined set of products that allow you to efficiently book those things. Sure, it's still a little bit like Burger King. You can have it your way, but it gives you that kind, you're getting a hamburger. You're not going into Burger King and ordering a burrito. And then it goes from there into executing on it. So getting on the ad server, getting it served, bringing those numbers back so that you can bill against it. And then, essentially one of the main values here is the ability to have a record of that and be able to see everything so that the next time a proposal comes in from that advertiser, what worked, what didn't work, the pricing, and you're not starting from scratch again. You've got the data behind you to actually make things better for your clients every time you interact with them.
So, and I have a question because that's such a core function. If the cash register breaks, company's done, right? So you played this role in terms of continuity on the technology side or the consulting side. How often are you diving into fixed problems where the leader was there previously, got the system stood up, and now they and their team are moving on and no one knows how to operate it?
It's not usually that. It's almost like death by a thousand cuts, or I always consider it the Rubik's Cube, right? So many times a leader will come in, or, a consulting team, or, the team organizes around themselves, but they take the Rubik's Cube, they work through it, and it's pristine, and there it is, and it's working. And then, 3 months, 6 months out, there's some sort of exception, or somebody comes in and is like, we need to do this fast. And then there's just a little shift on the Rubik's Cube. And then within a year, 2 years, 3 years, you're back to this Rubik's Cube that's just completely disordered and not working and needs to be pristine again. So then you relaunch an effort to clean up your tech stack and clean up your processes and your data around that to get it working again in the most efficient way.
That's a great analogy. And I think, just talking about a lot of how we think about it in the incremental marketer is, how do you insert incrementality into your day-to-day workflow as a media team? So a lot of marketers think about media in terms of the channels they plan, the platforms they buy on, and the performance that you get, from channels and platforms, and you add it up. But there's a whole operational system behind it. So what do you think marketers often underestimate in terms of how media actually gets planned, sold, activated, and managed?
Yeah. So I think probably the grand scheme of things is that it's both really difficult and really easy. And my background actually from an education perspective is chemistry. So it makes me think of thermodynamics, and I'm not going to go very technical here.
Feel free. We're chemistry supporters here.
So what thermodynamics does is essentially it measures the movement and speed of every atom in a system. And we're talking about beyond trillions and trillions of atoms. So what scientists learned very early on was that you're never going to be able to trace the movements of each individual atom. But what you can do is use statistics to understand what's happening on average. And so from there, if you think about the combustion engine, airplanes, there's a ton of our modern world that rests on that idea that we're not going to find every atom and find where it's going. But what we're going to do is just take a look at the picture and understand kind of what's happening holistically. And, I think that anyone can sit back and go, I want to know this data, I want to know that data, and dive deep into the idea of, I want to understand where every cent is going. I want to understand how every impression performs. And that's very difficult. I would say impossible. And if not impossible, then you have to ask the question of, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the investment that you would have to put into that to get those answers worth what you would find when you get those answers? Or do you step back? And there's the question of, at what level do you step back? But do you step back and say, okay, statistically, this is what's happening. And now I can use that statistical information to understand and direct what's happening so that I can do something as complex as build the equivalent of an ad tech combustion engine. And I'll give you a great example. So when we were at Yahoo, I had a client who consistently wanted to cut certain ads. So they had a very small image, and that image drove easily the value for why they were working with Yahoo. And in an upfront situation, they had to spend double what that button cost in supporting media in order just to be able to get that button.
So this is a very prominent placement on a very prominent one of Yahoo's properties. And so it was a beloved sales tool, right? I just need the button. And just let me sell
all
that.
I want is the button. All I want is the button.
Right.
And I'm sure that they thought it was a sales tactic, but we were like, you need the surrounding media. You need this other media in order to support this button. And it was always every year it was contentious in terms of this supporting media does not have the ROI for us. This button is all we need. And then one fateful weekend, I'm going to age myself here, but all flash ads went down on Yahoo. So what that ultimately meant was that this button that they loved so much was not impacted because it was just an image, but all that supporting media around that image was down for the weekend. And when they looked at the reporting, what they found was that the button, the performance tanked. So aligning back to the kind of it statistically showed that supporting media was actually impacting what that button was doing. The idea of kind of spending the money to understand how much it was and et cetera, due to this error, we didn't have to do that. We actually think ended up following up with a study. But the idea is here, you can understand what's happening and that you're in an ecosystem. I think one of the other things that's interesting to me is that we have terminology that we use all the time, and I think it loses its meaning because we use the terminology so much. So I'm hearing
industry insiders.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about that the age of the impression is gone. And it just made me stop and think, when we say impression, we literally mean an impression. You get one chance per impression to make an impression about your brand on an individual. Like that's not going away, right? We like as brands, we still need to make impressions on real people, and that impression impacts how they feel about that brand, and that feeling then impacts actions that they make in the future. And so I think that just getting down to like, what are we talking about when we say these things is important? And, what does that mean? I think that we're right to focus on actions that we want and the ROI for the actions and incrementality. But it all starts with, how does that person feel about your brand? And how does that feeling then impact what they do in the future?
That's a great insight. Yeah. And I'm reminded to the journey, that one that you mentioned, it's not like a funnel, like straight down the funnel. It's a nest, right? We think about it as these layers that you take a stick here, you take a piece of mud, you take a feather, you put them all together, and you now have a perception of that brand where you are ready to convert at some point, but it's been built up over multiple months or multiple years, in many brands' cases. Yeah. And that's very difficult to quantify. So I think in your world, you've seen the example of incrementality. I love that example. And it was sort of a prove it moment, like a match market test or a fluctuation test that wasn't planned.
Paul, I'll just put a kind of an exclamation point on this.
Yeah.
It's something that everyone should have already known, right? This button wasn't magic. If you just stopped and stepped back, everyone should consider the fact that I'm not going to click on a button if I don't have a relationship with the brand that button represents.
Right.
So I'll just throw this out there. We always see kind of like the government is doing the study, and we laugh because it's like government is doing a study that, air helps birds fly. And we're like, why are they doing that? We all know this. But I think within our industry, we kind of do the same things. There's the gut feeling, there's the fundamentals of how marketing works. But then we can go down the rabbit hole of like, I want to see how this works. I want it to be proven to me, and I want numbers on it. When in general, you just live by those fundamentals.
Great reminder. And now you're fresh back from some conferences in Chicago, and I think you're kind of right in terms of on trend for what you're seeing on the consulting side in terms of business transformation needs. Can you just kind of talk a bit about business transformation initiatives in the era of 2026, midsummer AI? What determines whether those efforts succeed or if they stall out?
Sure. Yeah. It's not going to be sexy. I'll just start with that. I would love to say I've got this silver bullet that I'm going to pull out, and it's, a magic feather. But ultimately, I think it really boils down to governance. Is there strong executive leadership? Is there a strong vision for what needs to be done? Is there alignment around that vision? And then is there a plan to execute? It's very simple, and it's back to kind of the foundations of having a plan and making that happen. Where we come in and we see like there's been past challenges, typically are executives don't agree, or there's not even an executive with visibility over that program, or there's lack of alignment, infighting within divisions, or all of those things are aligned as they should be, but no one has actually gotten the plan to make this happen. So every week, someone in the project meeting is like, we just need another week. And at the next week, we just need another week, but no one stops to ask, what are you going to do in this week that's going to change the direction or that's going to get you to the next step within that plan?
The size of organizations that you're talking about, what's the typical size? Fortune 1000, 5,000? Is it mid-market? A little of all?
So at Overline, we tend to work with Fortune 500 global CPG and retail media brands and networks. Yeah.
Got it. So the complexity you're talking about is probably at the high end of organizational complexity.
Absolutely. Complexity is at the high end. However, I would say those same principles apply even if you're at a two-man startup. If there's not alignment, if there's not a plan, then that vision will fall flat.
And you've talked a lot about strategic partnerships, and your role as VP of Business Development and strategic partnerships. Not all partnerships are actually strategic. What separates a good partnership from one that never gets off the ground? And how do you make a strategic partnership work in this day and age?
I hope I'm not turning this thing into Bill Nye the Science Guy, but I'm going to use another science example here.
I love it.
And I just think about the principle of resonance. So when you have resonance, you're taking, energy and kind of focusing it. And then basically you're not getting more energy out of the system, but you're getting a better form of energy. You're not getting entropy. And so for any partnership to work, I think both sides have to be getting something, right? And typically those are pretty equal in terms of like, I'm giving you this, I'm giving you, and you're giving me this. But in a partnership that goes kind of to that next level, both sides are getting more than they're putting in. If you're a SaaS company, there's the general payment terms and then services rendered. But if you think about many SaaS companies are working with many partners, they have an understanding of what's happening across the entire industry in their little tranche. And if they're able to funnel some of that knowledge to their partner, and then the partner is also funneling their best practices and information that will help that SaaS partner, now it's kind of gone up a level. You're beyond what just the commercials of that partnership into something bigger. And I think that typically relationships inform that. There needs to be someone who's willing to take that risk in order to do something more than just the commercials. But when you have that relationship and then, once it gets going, it's almost like a snowball. Okay, now I've earned your trust here. Let's try something new. And that's what really creates that resonance, if you will, across two entities working together.
Professor Hines, I was just thinking we should rebrand this podcast. So for your, examples, we would love to hear what you're seeing on the AI side of things and how that's fitting in this ecosystem, whether it relates to resonance or thermodynamics or just like how you gel a strategic partnership. Where do you see AI fitting?
It's similar to what we were talking about a little bit in terms of the SaaS apocalypse, et cetera. But
yeah,
the AI opportunity is huge, and I think everyone sees that. For me, I think of it in terms of AI can do amazing things to eliminate manual work, but I don't think that all manual work is created equal. I'll put it that way. So the idea, me as a salesperson, when I'm going to talk to a company, when I'm going into a meeting, it would be great, and I do leverage AI to some extent, but if I'm just reading what AI has put out without actually putting in some of the sweat equity, then I'm not getting as much out of it, and I'm not going to go to that meeting as prepared. So I bake into my process additional work so that I am more prepared when I go into that meeting. The B side is also, if you take the right manual work or the right efforts of AI, they can actually be elevated into something different. So take, for example, business meetings. No one wants to be the person recording the business meetings, doing the notes. And from my own personal history before AI, I would spend an hour after a meeting just getting all the notes together so that I would have those notes. So amazing time savings. But that in itself is very tactical. If you have a large company, across that company, all of those meetings are being recorded and transcribed and meeting notes taken, et cetera. And all of that's put into a repository. Now you have something that AI can leverage that no human can leverage. So any human can take notes, but you're not going to find any human who's going to take notes on every meeting, remember what was in those meetings, be able to surface areas that are coming up in disparate meetings with missing people and say, your company is concerned about this, but there's not a project on it. It's just coming up in every meeting. Like that is taking AI and doing something more with it than just note taking. And I think what we're right now where we are is everyone is thinking about the tactical aspects and not how do we find those areas where the tactical becomes something more. And then what's more is that many of these tactical efforts are point solutions. I'm using AI to do the things I need my way, and someone over here is doing the same thing but differently, and we're not connecting. So while it's saving time, it's also creating friction problems. I'll tell you another one that is really interesting to me because I never saw this one coming. It's what I call the whack-a-mole problem. So if you look on LinkedIn, all of a sudden, everyone in the industry is a LinkedIn influencer posting, and much of that is AI slop. So now for those of us who were posting on LinkedIn pre the AI influx, the question is now, where do I go to prove thought leadership? Right? How do I do those things that I was doing before so that it's actually valuable? Because the more people are using AI for things like that, the less valuable that output becomes. And and also, even if it is valuable, it gets hidden within the rest of the slot. That plays out in many different areas. I'm finding like emails are becoming less and less valuable, or they're seen as suspect. So in-person meetings are becoming more and more important. Referrals are becoming more and more important because anyone that sees an email, their first thought, before it was junk mail. Now it's junk mail and AI wrote it.
Right. And to add to that, one thing I see, we had a great conversation with the CPG leader in analytics the other week, and she was saying our organization has so many data points on effectiveness, but they're just lost in the ether. It's either a person has that knowledge, it's not been shared with the group, I have that knowledge, or I forgot it, to your point. It's just literally a human brain can't maintain this, but the system, the context window with all of that data in a unified system of record, it becomes so powerful. So I love thinking about that. And I know we got to wrap our podcast. Looking ahead, what do you think will separate the companies that adapt well from the ones that fall behind?
So there's been a lot of focus on testing and testing AI and that sort of thing. I would add to that and say testing AI in a structured manner and in a way that you can move forward instead of these point solutions. The other piece of this is also that you can't really move forward with AI unless you have a well-structured ad tech architecture and a well-structured business process. Otherwise, you're going to just be propagating the challenges you already had. I heard a great statement this week, and it was, computers can make mistakes at the speed of light. And I think that needs to be kind of in the back of everyone's mind as we're testing and thinking through AI. If you don't have the fundamentals down to begin with, you're just going to propagate bad processes moving forward, bad data moving forward. So the companies that have that foundation are the ones that are going to be successful.
I love it, Jeremy. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. We've covered a lot. How digital advertising has evolved since your Yahoo early days button and flash example to the operational friction that happens behind the scenes and what makes partnerships actually work. So We really appreciate you being on the podcast, sharing your perspective. Jeremy, how can people get in touch with you?
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me at jhines@overlineconsulting.com.
And for all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Incremental Marketer. Stay tuned for more voices, more lessons, and more proof that incremental moves can drive big growth.
Great. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Thanks, Jeremy. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and join us for more episodes with the leaders shaping the future of marketing.